the mid-coast was fully developed to the extent that's allowed by the existing LCP. This task was requested primarily because members of the community over the years have questioned the methodology that was originally used in 1980 to calculate LCP build-out, and specifically there have been concern that certain land uses were left out of that build-out calculation, such as second units, single substandard lots, and caretaker units, so that there have been concerns in the community that these would be hidden factors that would inflate build-out. What we did for this effort was to recalculate residential build-out by mapping and then manually counting all the residential parcels in the mid-coast. And that led to the tally that is shown on the screen. Basically, build-out in the project area, which is the mid-coast, according to existing LCP policy, this effort was to develop a baseline database, and what it yielded was that build out for residential development is 6,261 units, and that in the R1 zoned area, the lion's share of the units are located with 4,796, and the rest are far less. So that, as one can see, in terms of residential, the mid-coast is primarily a single-family residential area. It is important to note that this total assumes the staff, assumes the staff proposal to merge vacant residential substandard lots into conforming parcels, which I will be discussing as part of Task 5. Task 2, if you flip the page, if you happen to have a companion at-a-glance book, Task 2 was to determine the number of residential zoned substandard lots based on a reliable count rather than a sampling method, which is what we had used in the past when doing evaluations. Again, as most of you know, a substandard lot is a subdivided unit of land that is smaller than the zoning minimum parcel size. And particularly for the mid-coast, there are quite a few of them. This is because between 1906 and 1910, much of the mid-coast was subdivided into small lots, with the most common size being around 2,500 square feet. Here again, we mapped and manually counted all residential subdivided lots. Also, we organized the data by the potential to combine these lots into conforming parcels based on the ownership pattern. And what you see in the chart here is a counting of the lots if they were to be combined according to ownership lines, vis-a-vis if there were lots that are contiguous in common ownership, these lots could be combined into, for example, there are 948 vacant lots that could be combined into a 2-lot parcel, 357 lots that could be combined into a 3-lot parcel, and 36 lots that can be combined into a 4-lot parcel. And there are 287 lots that stand alone, where, according to the ownership pattern, there is no land contiguous to these parcels for these lots, so that they can be merged. And so this was the methodology we developed to, at the same time, count substandard lots, but also be able to manage that count and determine if merging or combining these lots was to occur, how many parcels would result. Now we'll move to Task 3. Task 3 is very important for any planning study. Here, the request was to recalculate the infrastructure capacity necessary to serve mid-coast residential build-out using the most current demand data. Basically, this task called for determining whether a match exists between available infrastructure capacity and the projected demand at build-out under existing LCP policy. We researched typical household demand figures and contacted the supplying utilities and read their reports, and that became a basis for some of the conclusions we reached. I'm going to briefly go over those. Basically, as most of you know, water supply is divided in the mid-coast between 2 suppliers. There's what was Citizens Utility that is now called California American Water Company. But I learned today that may be an interim name that another company is thinking of buying them. But anyway, they serve generally the area north of Half Moon Bay Airport. And at build-out, according to existing LCP policy, the demand for water in the Citizens Utility or California American service area is, we've determined, is 0.64 million gallons per day, and the company's existing capacity is 0.47 million gallons. So if the company were not to provide additional water supply, there'd be a 27% shortfall. There'd be a lacking in water compared to how much development the LCP would allow. The story is different for the area south of Half Moon Bay Airport, which is generally served by a Coastside County Water District. At build out in the mid-coast, we calculated it would be 0.74 million gallons per day, and the district has its existing capacity, meaning the water that is available to the district. Some of it is based on contract with San Francisco and Crystal Springs Reservoir, is 1.11 million gallons per day. So in this case, there's an excess of water which is available to the district when compared to what demand for water would be an LCP residential build-out. There's one agency providing wastewater treatment for the entire mid-coast, Sewer Authority mid-coast side. We've determined that the sewer treatment demand to build out for residential uses would be 1.14 million gallons per day, and the capacity is 2.03 million gallons per day. So here there's quite an excess of sewer capacity when compared to demand of residential build out. The story is very much different when looking at highway capacity. The projected 2010 level of service for most congested sections of Highway 1 and 92. This would be in 2010. It'd be a point just short of build out. It is in advance of build out. There are different scenarios, and we'll get to that to determine at what year the build out would actually occur. But anyway, at the year 2010, at the most congested segments of these segments that I've listed here, 4 of the segments would be at level of service F, and that's characterized by the demand exceeding capacity, force flow, stop, gridlock, very difficult conditions, and only one segment would be an LOSE, which is still a very difficult driving situation. Now we move to task 4. This will be the task that we talk about in the next meeting. This task was to reevaluate whether the annual residential growth rate limit, which is 125 dwelling units per year, should be lowered. The LCP limits the number of new houses built in the mid-coast to 125 per year. And since 1980, the number of residential units built in the mid-coast has averaged about half that amount, about 50 to 60. And this has primarily been due to varying water and sewage availability at different times in the 20 years that the LCP that this limit has been in effect. The task was requested. Again, the task was to evaluate whether this should be lowered, the limit of 125. This was requested since community members have concerns about traffic and drainage impacts associated with the current amount of mid-coast construction, which is less than that allowed by the existing LCP, and wanted to see a lower limit. In this report, we thoroughly analyzed the reason for annual growth controls and developed 5 alternative scenarios, including Half Moon Bay's actual also annual limit. And what we're recommending, at least the recommendation as we embark on the workshop process, is shown on the screen, and that is to to lower the growth rate limit from 125 units per year to 73 units per year. Where this came from was in doing research, the an original planning horizon or length that was anticipated in 1980 for the Mid-Coast to be built out was 30 years. So one looked at the LCP as a 30-year plan when it was first developed. And though development has lagged below that rate, that was the initial expectation. So I used that 30 years and thought, if we were to start a 30-year build-out period now, from where we are now with the community a little over half built, and we look at the remaining number of units that would be allowed toward build-out, it would work out under a 30-year scenario to 73 units per year, which is a reduction from 125. But another component of the proposal, which is not a part of the 125, and I think could be a reason for some of the problems, is right now the 125 per year does not, it could occur anywhere at one time in the Mid-Coast. Vis-a-vis, if sewer and water was available only in El Granada, all the development could occur there. What we're proposing is that the 73 units per year be distributed each year amongst the Mid-Coast community according to, amongst the Mid-Coast communities, meaning Montero, Moss Beach, El Granada, Miramar, according to some measure that equates with the proportionate size of the community. So we can talk about, we will talk about this during the workshop in 2 weeks, that if there is agreement that distributing the annual limit amongst the communities is a sound one, whether to base it on the size of the individual community, the population, or the number of vacant lots. These are all different measures one could use to determine how much does Montero get, how much does El Granada get, how much does Miramar get. Again, it could be based on acres, it could be based on population, or it could be based on how many lots are currently developed, the ratio of developed and undeveloped lots. There's a lot of different ways to distribute that proposed reduced limit to 73. We'll talk about that at the next meeting. And also, part of this request was that the amendment that would result would clarify that the limit applies to number of units per year, whereas the current language is building permits, and that has caused problems in the past with interpretation, whether someone comes in with one building permit for 6 units, does it count as 1 or 6? Our proposal is make it clear that it's 6. Okay, move to task 5. This is to evaluate the adequacy of existing development controls for residential non-conforming parcels, something that the planning staff has been directed by the Board of Supervisors to evaluate at different times over the last 10 or 15 years, and the regulations have, and the policy and regulations have changed a bit each time, and staff is proposing even more change. As most of you know, a non-conforming parcel is a building site that is smaller than the zoning minimum parcel size, and it may or may not be comprised of substandard lots. The current floor area controls currently are more restrictive for non-conforming parcels than they are conforming parcels. And this came out of the last go-around of the house size amendments 2 years ago, where Mid-Coast Council came up with an approach that was endorsed by the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors, that non-conforming parcels be limited to 0.48 parcel size as an FAR, and conforming parcels 0.53, so that you would be allowed a marginally smaller house on a non-conforming parcel. Even with the more restrictive house size controls, there still remains a concern in the community by some that substandard lots can be split off and thereby increase residential build-out. Some also have a concern that the existing house size limit is not restrictive enough, and that halfway-based proportionality rules should be required. We analyzed all these issues, and the staff proposal is shown on the screen. The proposal recommendation is that the county comprehensively merge contiguous vacant residential substandard lots in common ownership to the extent allowed by the law. When I say extent allowed by the law, well, that's another way of saying that you can only merge up to a minimum parcel size of 5,000 square feet. If one was to, let's say, change zoning to 20,000 square feet, you couldn't merge to that amount. So that's what extent by law means. Also, our proposal is to maintain the existing R1S17 policy of merging developed residential substandard lots at the time of demolition when that lot becomes vacant again. And we would recommend extending this policy to all the residential zoning districts, not the R1S17. So basically, vacant substandard lots in common or contiguous and common ownership, we're recommending that the board initiate a comprehensive merger program, and then for developed lots, that the merger occur case by case as there's a change in the housing stock and the house is torn down. Aside from the merging, we're recommending that the existing zoning controls, which are only a year and a half old and result from a lengthy task force process, continue to apply for non-conforming parcels. And as I indicated, this would be continuing to limit house size to 0.48, parcel size, continuing to require daylight plane, facade articulation features, requiring use permit review for parcels that are smaller than 3,500 square feet, require design review committee approval, which is true for all residential construction, and prohibit, this is really key, prohibit exceptions to floor area height and parcel coverage limits. And all of that is part of the most recent package of controls that was adopted by the board about a year ago in the Coastal Commission in the summer. We move to Task 6. Task 6 is still in progress. As I indicated, the house size amendment project resulted in the creation of the Mid-Coast Design Review Committee. That committee was assembled, constituted, I think, last fall, and is currently working on developing new design criteria. Developing new design criteria for the residential areas. The committee's work for design review criteria is still midstream, and it is anticipated that late spring, early summer, which we're getting there now, I guess it's anticipated that around June or July, the design review committee will have a recommendation to submit to this workshop with their proposed design criteria. And we have scheduled, as you'll see in the workshop schedule, I think August. And Lisa Awazaza, who is also a planning staff, has been the staff liaison with the design review committee in development of the new design criteria. Moving on to Task 7. This one is to develop traffic mitigation requirements for new developments similar to CCAG's congestion management plan implementation guidelines. The intent underlying this task was to consider requiring exactions on individual projects for state highway improvements, just as mitigation fees are already collected for county roads in the Mid-Coast. At the time we were having the task force scoping sessions, excuse me. At the time we were having the scoping sessions, there was some concern that though new houses are contributing to their impacts on local roads, it was felt that they are not contributing to their impacts on state roads. Mark Duino, who is the principal planner in long-range planning, and who also wrote the county-wide transportation plan, prepared the staff analysis for this task and the proposal, which is on the screen. And the proposal is actually three-pronged. It's to require mitigation fees for highway wind improvements adjacent to the Mid-Coast, directly adjacent to the Mid-Coast. Consider requiring transportation demand measures for development projects that require CEQA review, and these are the larger projects, and study the feasibility of expanding shuttle transit service between the Mid-Coast and Bayside. Mark will be here in the second meeting in June. The workshop will be exclusively devoted to this transportation task. We now move to Task 8. This task was for staff to evaluate opportunities to increase commercial and office development and to emphasize sites in Princeton and beside Half Moon Bay Airport. This task was based on a shared recognition in the community that one way to offset the jobs housing imbalance that currently exists And one way to not worsen traffic congestion is to increase the employment opportunities for coastside residents. And the proposal is a four-pronged approach. The first approach is to add to the W waterfront district 4 new permitted uses, and the waterfront district is highlighted on the map. And the 4 uses that we're proposing as our proposal, in addition to the job-generating uses that are allowed, would be research and development facilities, administrative, professional, and business offices, off-site retail establishments. I made up that term basically when I'm talking about these would be facilities that people would order via computer, catalog, or telephone, and then this would be the point where it would be distributed, or where the sale would occur, but there really wouldn't be the public on the site. I'm not sure of the exact name. I came up with off-site retail sales because basically the purchase maybe would occur through some medium, and then the package that was purchased, the commodity, would be shipped off-site. And then finally, construction and maintenance firms, trades and business. This would mean like contractors' offices and things like that. The next thing, it also affects the W district, and that is to increase the W district shoreline area a half a block northward. The area shown in yellow would be the area that we're proposing to increase. Basically, there's a shoreline area that's protected from more coastal dependent uses and currently covers about a half a block. If this is the shoreline, is the inside, or I guess outside half a block of Princeton, closest to Princeton Avenue and the sea. The proposal is to, while increasing employment opportunities in the inland area behind it, also attempt to protect more of the shoreline area for more coastal dependent uses that really rely on their location being next to the water. So basically, it's instead of just a half a block, it's all the way to the next road. Okay, that's the second prong. The third prong is to permit commercial and office uses on portions of the Half Moon Bay Airport property, as well as rezone a second 7-acre property fronting Highway 1 from open space to a commercial district. The 2 sites on the airport, by reviewing and researching airport documents, I've determined that, talking also to airport staff, that these are areas that have been determined as not necessary for airport-related uses and could be considered for job-generating commercial type development. The bullet-shaped parcel across the road is also county-owned, and it also, because of its street frontage, could be considered for, we're recommending to be considered for commercial development as well. So the 4-pronged approach, to recap, would be to add more uses in the inland areas of the W district, so to hopefully trigger more job creation, development, to also marginally increase the shoreline area to protect uses that need to be near the water, to open up more land for commercial and office uses. Well, that's basically it. So that's task 8. Task 9, which also affects the Princeton area and the W district. Task 9 was to evaluate opportunities to increase industrial, commercial, and office development in the airport overlay district. The airport overlay, or AO zone, affects a portion of the waterfront zoning district, and you can see that on the map. It's the hatched area. And it's that area of Princeton that's nearest Half Moon Bay Airport. The AO zone was established in the late 1970s to assure that the hazard potential from an airplane takeoff or landing would be minimized, and the current regulations reduce the intensity of uses on a site in this area to more than 3 persons at any given time. The staff proposal is to reduce by approximately 1/4 the size of the AO zone while continuing to conform with airport safety requirements, and to provide the same increased permitted uses I just described in the W area. Why don't you put the map back on and explain that? What I did was I did some research and I overlaid all the aircraft safety regulations from the federal government, state, the ALUC, that's at the end of the runway at Huffman Bay Airport. And what I found out is this overlay of state and federal regulations ends at the red, and what goes beyond where the red is county only. It's the only regulation in terms of aircraft safety that is not mandated by any state or federal airport protection agency that's actually designated to do that job. The only area that doesn't have state or federal requirements is the red area. So I question, why is the county protecting that ground space if the federal government and the state government does not see that it poses the risk? And that became the basis for this, by doing this overlay, for identifying the red area as this may be area that is not, it does not justify, the danger doesn't justify the AO zoning, so the staff recommendation is to eliminate that area from the AO zone, and then in addition, open up that area to the same increased number of job-generating land uses as the other inland areas in the W district. Okay, move on to task 10. We're almost halfway through it now. The next three tasks relate to a common question, and that question was, to what degree should residential uses be permitted in a non-residential zoning district? Vis-a-vis, should houses be allowed in a retail area? Should mixed use be allowed in a commercial recreation area and things like that? So we're going to first look at task 10. This task says evaluate whether residential units in the C1 and CCR zoning districts should be limited to mixed-use development. This task arose because some members of the community were concerned that residential units would ultimately displace commercial units in C1 zone parcels, because the current zoning does allow residential use with a use permit. And conceivably, someone could come in and apply for a use permit to build a house in the limited supply of neighborhood commercial zone land. And so that question was raised because of that concern. Also, it was raised because other members of the community were questioning whether residential should be limited to only mixed use in the CCR areas of Princeton and Miramar. So after evaluating this proposal, our recommendation is to restrict residential development in the C1 zoning district to second floor mixed units with commercial below. Basically, there was three alternatives that I laid out. One's the status quo, which taken to its limit means that a person could apply for a use permit to build a house in a single area. The other extreme is to totally prohibit residential in a commercial area. And the course that we're proposing is the mixed-use approach, so that commercial is reserved for the ground floor where commercial occurs. The residential could occur above the commercial, and this is common in urban areas. And in some cases, the residential may subsidize the commercial business below too. So we're also proposing to lower the height in the C1 district from 36 feet to 28 feet to be consistent with the reduced height in the surrounding R1 areas that came out of the house size amendments that we did a year and a half ago. And we're also maintaining the existing requirement that residential development in CCR be limited to mixed units above and commercial below, kind of for the similar reason as the R1, in that we want to preserve the ground floor for commercial, and we want fully residential in an area that's dedicated for business-serving uses. But again, having the residential use above could augment the commercial business below. Okay, task 11 again is on that same theme about residential and non-residential areas. Here the the task was to evaluate whether permitted residential units for the W district should be limited to caretaker quarters, which is currently at 20% of the number of developed parcels, I should say, or expanded to allow mixed-use development in caretaker quarters greater than 20% of the number of developed lots. The proposal that staff is recommending, and we'll be talking about when we have a workshop on this item, is to maintain the policy that limits residential units to caretaker quarters, not allow for other residential uses in the W district, which is primarily for waterfront industrial. Also to, whereas it currently is 20% of the number of developed parcels, to, well, first of all, to prohibit caretaker quarters on non-conforming parcels less than 5,000 square feet, which would be consistent with the other measures we have for non-conforming parcels, and to limit caretaker quarters to 20% of developed conforming parcels. So basically, if I was to say it simply, residential uses can only, in W district, the waterfront district, can only be in the form of caretaker quarters. They have, the limit is at 20% of the developed parcels, and we're talking about only parcels that are over 5,000 square feet. That's basically it. Okay, task 12 is the final one on residential in a non-residential district. The task here was to evaluate whether residential units should be prohibited in the COSC zoning district. The COSC, or Community Open Space Conservation District, is a very low, extremely low density zoning district located at the base of El Granada. The zone was established in 1980 to provide an open area that could be viewed from the road as the gateway or entrance to El Granada. And this can be shown on the map. Thanks. Residential uses are allowed subject to a use permit, and my understanding is currently one house in the COSC district. As shown on the screen, the whole question here was, do you prohibit houses or do you allow them? I mean, basically, you got down. That really is the question. And the approach we're taking, with the advice of County Council at this point, is that we maintain allowing single-family residential development until such a time as the community has identified alternatives and assure a reasonable return to the property owners. So our advice from County Council is to use that as a test, and if the community comes up with a use that would provide a reasonable return to the standards that have been set up through the courts, then we would consider eliminating single-family residential. Okay, moving to task 13. This one was to evaluate methods to better protect project area land that's designated agriculture, zone PAD, and designated open space, and zone RMCZ. As you can see, actually, Allison's going to put on a map that shows the sites in the mid-coast area that are either designated open space or agriculture. The LCP, well, first of all, I should say there are 12 sites. Inside the urban-rural boundary are most of them. Many of these are publicly owned sites that tend to be larger parcels. The people have questioned, why do you have what is typically a rural designated land use like open space or agriculture in a principally urban area? And the LCP addressed this through policy 1.3 by acknowledging the appropriateness of this designation and stated, quote, some land has been included in the urban boundary which should be restricted to open space and not developed with relatively high densities. So it was recognized when the LCP was originally written that there were certain areas, there were certain needs in an urban community for open space areas, that it should not be considered incongruous. The task was to evaluate methods to better protect these areas, and the proposal, what I did was I looked at the permitted uses from the RMCZ and PAD. Well, basically, when you read the report, you'll see the evaluation. My conclusion was, if there's one thing county planning does, I think, really well, is protect agricultural land and protect open space land through very sophisticated resource management and agricultural ordinances that are generally applied in the rural area. However, when looking at in the mid-coast, I realized that certain uses are permitted that definitely are not appropriate in the urban area. So it's kind of a fine-tuning exercise. I'm recommending that the following uses be taken out of the RMCZ and PED district regulations in the mid-coast, and that would be timber harvesting, surface mining, solid waste facilities, and oil and gas exploration. I didn't see those as compatible in a generally urban area. As I said, with the C1 areas, the recommendation is, or the proposal is to lower the height, the permitted house height on RMCZ and PAD parcels from 36 feet to 28 feet, again consistent with surrounding R1 height limits. And also, I'm recommending that even though the zoning district may be, the designation may be open space or agriculture, that we should apply the same house size limits that we're applying in residential areas, which is 0.53 times parcel size, not to exceed 6,200 square feet. So basically, it's keep the existing PAD and RMCZ regulations with a fine tuning to make it more compatible with the mid-coast through eliminating incompatible uses, lowering house size, and lowering house floor area. Okay, we're almost done. We've probably 6 left or so, 6 or 7. Task 14. This is to evaluate existing land use controls in the rural residential area, which is designated very low density residential RMCZ. And that's the yellow area northeast of Montero. This area can be thought of as a transitional zone between designated residential and the open space lands to the east. Here, our proposal is to maintain the existing very low density residential designation in zoning, but again prohibit the same incompatible uses, timber harvesting, surface mining, solid waste, and oil and gas exploration. And again, lower house size to 28 feet and apply also the same lower area ratio that we do for residential parcels, for residential zone parcels. Okay, I was fortunate when I embarked on task 15 because I found out that the Congress was ahead of me on this. Back a year and a half ago, it was evaluate opportunities to designate the Devil's Light bypass right-of-way as a park, trail, open space, or resource preserve. When I started doing research on this, I guess in the middle of the summer, I found out that there's a existing U.S. congressional effort spearheaded by Congressman Tom Lantos to include the bypass right-of-way in the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. So that made my job a lot easier in working on this task. And the proposal is to encourage the board, the Mid-Coast Community Council, and other groups to participate on the GGNRA Citizen Advisory Commission. For task 16, the task was to evaluate opportunities to add remaining segments to the coastal trail. Our proposal, and if you review the alternatives report, is to review the methods that I've outlined in the report on how trail segments could be added, and I've also gone through some possible funding sources for trail development. So there really isn't a proposal that the county planning department do anything different to add segments to the coastal trail. However, in the alternatives report, techniques to add, the methods to add segments are discussed, principally from other agencies and approaches, and also funding sources and grants, available grants and things like that are explored, so that if one wanted to take the lead on adding coastal trail segments, this would be a resource one could use. 17 is similar. It's to evaluate opportunities to establish a parallel trail within the Highway 1 right-of-way and an underground pedestrian crossings along Highway 1. Here again, the county planning department isn't proposing to take the lead on this, but in the alternatives report, we evaluate. What I do is I lay out possible funding sources for a group that did want to take the lead on this. Task 18, this is one where we definitely did take the lead. Task 18 is to revise the LCP sensitive habitats map to 1, correct omissions, 2, to incorporate new information, 3, to reflect changes in the endangered species listings, and 4, to reconcile with other adopted maps. When I started to look at this, I went over materials that were used to develop the existing LCP sensitive habitats map, which was done in 1978 based on reconnaissance and information known then. Also, I scrutinized the definition of sensitive habitats and found that I think it was the state listings were omitted, but federal listings were included, or the other way around, and there was no mention made of the Native Plant Society's inventory in the definition, though in the mapping some of that was included, so there wasn't a lack of reconciliation. So I picked apart the definition, made it as comprehensive after my evaluation as possible, and I revised it. In the proposal as shown on the screen is to revise the definition to include both state and federal endangered species listing categories and also recognize the state of California Native Plant Society inventory. And then the outcome of this was actually to revise the map. Using sources that were not available in 1980, plus information that we've gathered, plus also working with local members in the community who are very conversant, principally Chuck Kozak, in sensitive habitats and riparian areas and wetlands. And since 1990, there's a national wetlands inventory that has come out. There's also a natural diversity database and reconnaissance. I was able to scrutinize, me and others in the office were able to scrutinize a lot of information that wasn't available in the past. It all culminated in the map that's farthest, the next map over, the last map over. This is a 1 to 2,000 rendition of the map. We are currently preparing a map that will be 5 times larger. We're going to have separate sheets so that one can use it in parcel by parcel analysis, and it incorporates all the data sources that are available, and the best work we could do without actually doing a full reconnaissance of the coast side for this effort. That map, when we have the actual workshop, I will then have those large, this could be 1 to 430 scale, where that's 1 to 2,000 scale. So I will have those maps. Yeah, that's basically what this map is. We see as, we believe this is an accurate depiction of sensitive resources based on the current information available, short of actually doing a walk through the Maine coast as reconnaissance. Okay, task 19 of 22, so we're almost done. Resolve conflicts in the definition of wetland and clarify who enforces wetland vegetations. There are about 5 or 6 well-respected agencies that each have a different definition of wetland. You have the State Fish and Game, Federal Fish and Wildlife, Army Corps of Engineers, Coastal Commission, National Academy of Sciences, LCP, and they all are very credible definitions, but they're all very different. And what I did was I evaluated each one of them and identified where they were similar and where they were different. And I'm currently reviewing the implication of these definitions with County Council, and by the time we have a workshop on this, I will have a preferred definition. At this point, I basically have done the analysis of all the credible definitions that are out there. And in the report, we also responded to who enforces wetland violations. The Wetland Enforcement Authority is described in the report. Okay, task 20. This one is an ongoing one, kind of like design review. Resolve LCP policy conflicts and clarify ambiguous provisions. Retain the most restrictive or protective provision. Use objective rather than subjective zoning standards. This one's in progress. As a starting effort, Chuck Kozak has been collecting notes that he had of inconsistencies and ambiguous provisions and just things that were conflicts that have been raised in council meetings, and he has turned those over to me, and what we're doing is going through them and seeing how much these are actually conflicts or inconsistencies. And then we're also, on our own, going to be doing a comprehensive review of all the LCP policies, working also with our current planning staff in the past to administer these regulations, to to try to identify where these policy conflicts exist. When we have the workshop on this, which will probably be in October, we will have it pretty well sussed out, which we don't right now. Okay, task 21. Identify Midcoast related responsibilities that the LCP assigns to the county and determine the status and effectiveness in completing each. This relates to policies of the LCP that call upon the county to accomplish certain tasks. There are policies in the LCP that says the county shall monitor this, or the county shall report every 5 years on this, or the county should establish a shoreline access fund. There's certain tasks and responsibilities that have been delegated to the county through the LCP as was certified by the Coastal Commission in 1980. And my role with this task was to determine how well have we actually carried out those responsibilities. The conclusion is, in general, the county has effectively met the assigned responsibilities. I've itemized them and done an assessment of each in the report. Some, there's been partial completion rather than full completion, and where that has occurred, the recommendation is that we proceed towards full completion, and this is described in the alternatives report. And finally, the last task that I'll be discussing tonight, which was to consider adopting Coastal Act sections 30250 through 30254 as LCP policy. These sections establish statewide coastal development criteria. What I did was, in the report, I thoroughly analyzed each of these Coastal Act sections against existing LCP policies. And basically, if a section said do this, we went through the LCP to see if is there a provision in the LCP that says to do the same thing. And we found that there was. And that was comforting because our LCP shouldn't have been certified if it wasn't. I mean, that was the whole reason the LCP was certified by the Coastal Commission, was that it was conforming with the Coastal Act. So our recommendation is that there's no change. We don't adopt or incorporate those Coastal Act sections because we feel that this would be redundant, and it's really not, I think, in the best interest to be redundant. That we found that these LCPs effectively do conform with the Coastal Act sections. Now, there is a task 23 that did not come out of the scoping sessions, but it was a proviso, I guess a condition of our grant we got from the Coastal Commission, and correspondingly, our Planning Commission independently asked for the same thing, and that was to develop impervious surface controls, or evaluate impervious surface controls, and stormwater and review our stormwater management, or not stormwater management, non-point pollution. Anyway, we're working on that. That did not come out of the scoping session, so I didn't really want to bring that today since it's not done. But since it came from the Coastal Commission Planning Commission, we are going to work on that, and we'll bring that up in the late fall. What I'm going to be talking about during the balance of my presentation, before we open it up for you to talk, to begin the community discussion, what I'd like to talk about is the schedule and the goal of the workshop, and how I see it, what my kind of vision is for the workshop process. I'd like to turn your attention to the workshop schedule. Through my, when I've gone through the tasks I was alluding to, we're going to talk about this in August, or we'll be talking about this in November. Here I put together an actual schedule. I think there's 14 or 15 workshops, with the last one being on November 18th. I should pull back a moment and state that we are proposing to meet. I'm proposing that we meet on the first and third Monday of each month. The reason I selected the first and third Monday is after doing some research, I've determined these days least compete with other meetings, civic meetings being held on the coast side. We have special districts that will meet those meetings. We have Apple Bay, Planning Commission and Council. We have basically the special districts, and the Midcoast Council itself. So basically, after researching when other meetings were occurring, My proposal is to be the first and third Monday of each month. As a contingency plan, I'm also proposing that an additional meeting could be held 1 week after the scheduled meeting on an as-needed basis. That means in the workshop process, if we're almost done with a certain task, instead of bumping the task to be discussed at the next workshop, I am developing contingency plans so that we can say, well, look, if we only need 2 more hours to finish this task, why don't we meet next week at this location? And my objective is that we can still attempt to stay on schedule, but then also allow the maximum amount of participation too. We're not going to compromise participation. So, the schedule on the screen. If you look at the screen, you can see that on May 6th and May 20th, we'll be discussing Task 4, which is that 125 building permits per year limit. On May 20th and June 3rd, we'll be discussing substandard lots and non-conforming parcels. And on July 22nd and August 5th, we'll be discussing Tasks 8 and 9, which have to do with mid-coast job opportunities and the waterfront AO zone. I note these dates because they appear to involve the most controversial topics and issues. And I think that these topics, it's my belief that these topics would benefit from the services of a professional meeting facilitator. I think during the scoping session phase, I had indicated that if we did receive a Coastal Commission grant, our intent would be to, at least in part, have a professional facilitator to help us work through these controversial issues. To that end, the county is currently in contract negotiations with Jeffrey Tumlin, who's a principal at Nelson Nygaard Consulting Firm, to be the meeting facilitator for these tasks. I selected him because I've seen him facilitate a controversial project on the Bay side, and I was impressed by his skill in drawing solutions out of the participants and maintaining objectivity. As meeting facilitator, he would lead the community discussion as a neutral participant, and his role would largely be to keep the discussion focused and moving forward, listen, paraphrase, and clarify participant comments, and reframe suggestions and solutions to increase group support. So, just to summarize, the most difficult and controversial tasks, at least the way I see it, I believe would benefit from a professional facilitator. I've seen one that works well. I've asked him to submit a proposal. We've talked about the proposal, and we're now working on a contract. And if all goes smooth, he'll be at the next meeting. If it doesn't, you have me. I'll try to be objective. Next, I'd like to talk about workshop goals and process. As I've indicated, the alternatives report articulates the issues for each task, and identifies the staff preferred alternative. However, I view this only as a starting point for the workshops that will be following. Through this workshop process, multiple solutions and proposals will likely emerge from both community participants and staff, and together we'll work through them. A reasonable goal for this type of process would be to work toward a solution that is acceptable to most people, such that everybody could live with this, which is often called consensus. And while I believe consensus is a laudable ideal, I realize it can be very difficult to attain, particularly considering the topics, issues, perspectives that we'll be taking on. As an attainable alternative, what I'm proposing is that we'll always strive for consensus, but as a more realistic goal for the workshop process, that we attempt to develop 2 solutions when consensus cannot be attained. One that is acceptable to most of the participants, and then one that may be less popular, but it reflects the most widely held minority view. And in this manner, both the majority and minority proposals would be given legitimacy and transmitted to the Mid-Coast Council, the Planning Commission, Board of Supervisors for consideration. And I believe this way we can narrow the solutions, but not overlook the main minority viewpoint. And I think it may be more productive, it may be very productive for this group, because we are, I know by the different perspectives and issues, different perspectives in the room and in the community and the issues that we're tackling, that it'd be very difficult for all of us to walk out of this in complete agreement with one proposal. And I think that the realistic second best would be, there likely will be a proposal that most people can get behind, but there's also probably going to be a proposal that isn't as popular, but still it's a valid proposal that a smaller group of people endorse, and I would call it the minority proposal, and that has just as much legitimacy, at least being transmitted to the Planning Commission. So that's my proposal, not to say we're going to be here week after week after week because we're not attaining consensus, but try to narrow it down to two. Now I'd like to open up the public discussion phase of tonight's meeting. All comments are welcome, and please be mindful that we have workshop dates that will be dedicated to each specific task. If you do want to talk about any of the tasks, we will take notes. We're going to be recording everything, and when we actually have that dedicated workshop, we will bring out those comments too. What I'm looking for specifically tonight, since this is opening up the process and since we have been talking about the process, is comments about the workshop process that I've laid out, that I'm proposing, the schedule, and also I'm very desirous to receive information about any factual errors or inaccuracies that you may have identified in the report. This was the best effort that I could do, but I know I may have relied on some statistics that now are outdated by a report that I didn't know about or things like that. So I welcome any comments about accuracy, because I want this to be the best, well, we're all done, the best and most representative and accurate report, at least in terms of factual data. So with that, I'd like to open up tonight's meeting. I originally suggested speaker slips, but and I think I'm going to continue with that. That was a way to hedge against a huge crowd, and I thought maybe we could manage about it, but I think we'll do. So what we're going to do is, if you could fill out a speaker slip, and we'll just take them as I get them, no order at all.
George, do you want to do one task at a time, so we're talking about one subject area?
Well, we are.
You've got 3 on tonight.
What I had, right.
So I mean, if we did them one at a time, we wouldn't keep jumping all over the place.
Well, here's the thing. Tasks 4 through 20 or whatever are tasks that have proposals, and those will be discussed after tonight. The 3 that you're talking about are the 3 tasks where we have gathered data and recalculated build out, counted lots, determined capacity and demand. I welcome comments about those. Those are on the agenda tonight. We may not finish our discussions of those 3 comments, so those can continue over. But basically, since it's based on fact rather than value, this is something that we can hammer out through successive meetings as well. But to get to your point, which is, so we're going to take a one each, or at this point, I don't mind if you mix the 3 up, because I'm interested, in addition to the 3 comments on task, your comments about the process, because we're starting on this workshop effort. I've laid out my vision for this process. I'd like to hear what the group has, particularly that we meet on the first and third Mondays, and we dedicate each meeting to 1 or 2 tasks, that we have a facilitator, that we have a contingency plan to carry some things over, that we're not laboring to get everybody to get on board with one idea, even though that's a lofty idea with a majority minority. I'm interested in those type of comments tonight, in addition to comments you may have about the data collection that we can hammer around in the first couple of meetings. So with that, I'll turn it over to Liz. And I have a list of speaker slips, and Allison and Maru are going to take turns recording notes, so fresh note taking. Any more out there? Anything else? Okay, April, so you're on top.
We used to stand and do it here.
Oh, no, right from here. So you talk to the group.
Hi, April Vargas, Montera. Starting out with the process, I think that it's wise, your approach as far as reaching consensus, because that's something that can take a long time. Plus the fact that I always favored having some kind of a minority report. I think it is helpful for the ultimate decision makers on the board, the Coastal Commission and the Planning Commission, to get a sense of what other ideas and solutions people in the community have thought were important, and it's very possible through their deliberations that some of those ideas may actually become part of what's finally ratified in this process. So I think that that's a good idea. As far as the meeting schedule is concerned, 2 meetings a month is a big commitment, but this is a big process and a big project that the community's wanted for a long time. And we understand that there's a certain amount of constraint in terms of getting this done by about the end of the year so that the process can move forward. However, I also do support the idea of having intermittent meetings if we need them, because on the one hand, it is important to try to get this done by the end of the year, but on the other hand, if there's more discussion on points that has yet to come out, it's important to leave the time available for these discussions to be as thorough as possible. Plus the fact, I often find that after listening to a discussion, I'll go home, I'll think about it more, I'll read some more, talk to someone else about it, and I might have some subsequent comments about it. So I think that's one thing in my experience and in many other people's experience. When something seems to start, everyone's very concerned that the part they wanted to comment on will be over before they thought of everything they wanted to say. So I think a certain amount of built-in flexibility in the process will be really important. Not that we're going to slow everything up, but realizing that some people are going to have more things to say a little bit later on in the process. As far as questions are concerned, I had a question, George, on task number 3, specifically about the calculations for the available capacity from Cal American Water. My understanding is that there's currently a moratorium on any subsequent connections, and at this point we're only 55% to build out. So I was wondering how the math would work, that when we were all the way to build out, it would only be 27% shortfall, when we already at 55% don't even have enough water as it is. Okay, and that's all I have.
I'm probably not going to respond to all of the questions, we're mainly taking them in, but I will say that obviously I'm going to review the numbers. What I did as a general rule with all of these is I sought out reports that were made, I think in the case of Coastside County, one of the districts, it was something reported to the PUC. I found professional reports that were made, reports made I think submitted to the PUC. I think for the Citizens Utility area, it was a study that was done by the Montero Sanitary District. I found different reports that have been published, and I drew the capacity figures from those. What I will do is go through and isolate those reports, and at the next meeting show how the numbers work. Okay, Rick Loman.
Must be all of our questions, or just
Come back later if you don't have that many.
Okay, so it's going to be just the initial process.
Okay, great. I'll keep your slip.
I don't want to just like ramble on for 5 or 6 minutes. Since we're going to talk about the process, that would be my first real question, is how this process will roll out, and how we do the minority and the majority views and things like that. It seems like on the coast here, the only time you get a true majority view is either when you have a local election here and we get to actually vote for somebody, or when we take a measure to the county itself, like Measure T, for instance. And I'm worried that about these derived consensus when we do them here, because they seem to be a compromise between two positions. And the position we seem to be starting from all the time is, here's what the LCP is now. So the compromise will always be some level greater than where we are now. So I don't know, one proposal I made when we said this earlier was that we develop 2 LCP revision proposals, kind of like somewhat like what you were saying, if we have huge differences, like, something simply numerical, like the growth rate you were talking about, if a majority, let's say, just for the sake of argument, says 1% like that from today, and other people want a different number, could we basically develop 2 LCP change policies over time and this process, Plan A and Plan B, and then submit those plans to the public and actually vote on the process? Would be the original reason we put in some of this verbiage to get 2 plans, would be to let the people out here choose their LCP. So I'd like to see that go into the process somehow, rather than, I'll just use the Eldorado task force concept, which is, I would say forced consensus, take this or leave it kind of thing, and then whatever you do, the suits are going to vote anyway. So I'm concerned about that process, and again, cutting out the will of the majority again. Do you have, just a quick question, and I can come back later then, the current build-out numbers, the current LCP, I didn't bring.
Current LCP is 6,200.
6,200 units, that kind of thing. Because it seems like what I'm concerned about is the way we're drawing these units is we're starting, like I said, from today's baseline. Here's what we got. And here's, starting from exactly where we are now, here's the plan for how many more units in the build-out plan based on today.
Build-out is based, and I said this very clearly during the scoping sessions, the basis for build-out is existing land use designations in the LCP. And when we talk about this would be a baseline, if it's determined, let's say when we get the match of infrastructure, demand, and capacity, and the recognition of what build-out is under the existing LCP, if there's a room to change the LCP policy to reduce build-out or whatever, or change build-out, that's something that would be evolved from this. The intent of this task was to get an accurate fix on what build-out would be under the current LCP designations.
That's not what I meant is, let's say we have 3,700 homes or something in there right now. And let's say you looked at every single other lot, and based on what's left out there, you then determined this is what the build-out would be based on our current land policies for the remaining area.
Well, build-out is both remaining and existing.
Well, I mean, let's say, what I'm trying to get to is we've had a lot of cases where development has gone a lot denser than the current zoning. We just are. So, I mean, those weren't like renumbered in that. It's just saying we're not going to look at what's happened in the past in over density. We're starting from that baseline, and if there's a 5,000 square foot lot, we're going to put 1 house in it. I'm trying to say is we're ignoring everything that's happened in the past, and we're starting from a new baseline and saying on all the remaining stuff, is that what we're doing?
Well, basically, the baseline or the build-out numbers are again a reflection of the existing LCP policy, and so.
But only reflected on the remaining open, undeveloped lots.
Well, the presumption is.
That's what I'm trying to say.
But the presumption is that the development that will occur on those lots will be consistent with the land use plan of the LCP. That there wouldn't be a violation. What I did was, I took what the LCP allows for all the land in the wind coast and counted parcels and determined.
On the vacant lots.
I got vacant and
Right.
development. Right, I got vacant, unvacant, and so vacant is development yet to be seen. And I looked at what the LCP, the law, the policy of the county allows, and that's how I determined build-out. Build-out is what would be on the ground according to what the plan allows. Now, if we wanted to change the plan, or your point is, I think what I'm referring to, your comment, is a concern that what will end up on the ground will exceed what's allowed in LCP policy.
Well, yes.
And I'm not planning for that. I'm not planning for that.
But I'm saying we're
All I can go by is the
ignoring
LCP policy. I mean, if they say this is a 5,000 square foot minimum parcel size area, and I count the parcels in that area, and I have a proposal to merge up to the 5,000, and then the build-out was based on that merging, and then if they were already 5,000, they got a number one, not a number 2 or 3, because there's a concern that it may be abused in the future. I mean, basically, I read the law, and I applied the law to the ground, and I told us that there were units. And I trying to. The problem I remember when this came out was there was a concern that second units were not included in build-out, that caretaker quarters were not considered in build-out, and also that single substandard lots that are not in common ownership are smaller. And I counted them.
Do you have our current population? I thought our population was just under 12,000 for the open coast area.
Well, what I did was I looked, again, I did this, I didn't look at population, what I did is I looked at the total build out, how many units in the field and how many units there are now based on counts. We did is we counted all the development.
I would say you were using this 2.7 people per house or something like that.
Now you're saying, no, for actually determining the build out.
No, developing, there's a population figure in here. I think you said you
Oh,
used,
maybe that's a total.
yes, it's just 2.7 and the total number of people somehow.
Oh, right, okay, we did this, that was for like sewer demand and water.
Yeah, I was just curious, I thought we were around, just my recollection was just under 12,000 people. And you have like 3,400 lots or something like that, and it's 3.5 people per dwelling. I was just curious as to why.
I'll check.
It looks like we're too high or something. We have more people.
What I did is I got the 2.7 most current data, the census figures, so I'll go back and check.
Yeah, I'm just curious what our, I
What
thought
page
we
are you
did this.
looking at?
I was just looking at this. This was just units here, and I know in all of our literature, you said it's going to be like 17,000 people. It's on page.
Oh, I see this chart. Okay, yeah,
It's
okay.
on page 6.
Sorry, got it.
It just seems like from the numbers I've seen, we have more people. By this number, we would only have about 7,000 people. We
I
have
think
like
it
11,000.
may have something to do with the problem about the project area boundaries versus census
Okay.
numbers. I'll look into it.
Okay.
I'll be back on this. Julian McCurdy.
Basically, we just, I'm Julian McCurry, I'm the chair of the BCAC, which is the Princeton Citizens Advisory Committee. It's that district in Princeton. There is a rule by virtually different. No point was so bad. Princeton's different from the rest of the Northwest in most instances, in that it is solely businesses and property owners that are run businesses. Our concerns in with the first tasks are simply, first we want to thank you for all the work you put in. And then secondly, I guess I wanted to introduce Carolyn to speak on a couple of points.
This is actually blessedly brief. I'm Carolyn Rogers. I have a business down in Princeton. And I'm a former secretary of PCAC and did a lot of the groundwork on, our general plan, which then dovetailed into this process, our general plan study, which dovetailed into this process. And the question that we're raising on task 1, the recalculation of the build-out, is, I know that I understand this will be the first time the caretaker unit is considered as a residential unit for calculating the build-out. And, our take on it is that as such, it should not count as a whole one unit, for the reason that a caretaker unit is limited to 20% of the total floor space of the building that it's in. That's small. The maximum square footage you can have, no matter how big your building is 750 square feet. This is not the kind of unit that is going to attract families, at most a couple. This is not going to put the kind of burden on the infrastructure that a single-family dwelling is going to. And also, it's geared towards people who will live at their place of work. This is people who are not on the highway commuting, and not using basically utilities in 2 different locations. You're just in Princeton, you're not across the road in El Granado or in Moss Beach and in Princeton in one place. And I think that covers it. Of course, there'd be kind of an issue of calculating what the proportional value would be, but that was
Leonard Warren.
Leonard Warren over on. Most of my comments are on the specific tasks, so maybe I should come back. Are you going to then call on 1, 2, and 3?
No, you can incorporate it. If it's task 4 through
Okay.
22, you can probably let the dedicated mic, but you can talk about anything, actually.
All right. As far as the process, I think something's upside down here. The purpose of the LCP is to do two things: to protect the environment and protect access to the coastside by visitors. Any other objectives of the LCP are subsidiary to that. When the LCP was approved in 1980, basically it was one of the first LCPs approved. The Coastal Commission was so thankful that they didn't have to sue to get an LCP approved that they ignored the warts in this one. So saying that this was approved and that certain things in here must be okay because it was approved is irrelevant. This is now 23 years later, a quarter of a century later. There's things in here that by today's standards are garbage, and they're not being addressed in this update. In terms of your analysis, and I have a lot of respect for you. I think you do good work, and generally you have a good attitude toward the coastside, but I'm really shocked at reading your opinion of how well the county has met the requirements, because I give the county grades ranging from C to F on very nearly everything that you've said in the report. The county has basically met the requirement. It's laughable. The people here do not believe the county has met very many of those requirements. And I will probably attempt to write a dissenting opinion to every point in there on how well the county's met the requirement. And in some cases where the county's totally ignored it, you didn't even answer it at all. You never put the county has dropped the ball on this. You just totally ignore it where the county hasn't done anything to meet the requirement. In terms of the build-out population, we have a problem here. The land use plan was developed to have a certain limit on the population. It wasn't, and if the build-out population had been higher, then the Coastal Commission might not have approved the LCP. The LCP was approved with a fundamental assumption of an upper limit on the population. So going back now and recomputing the build-out population is upside down. You need to recompute the land use to keep the build-out population to what was originally envisioned. Because there's basically already too many people here. And the computations that I did 3 years ago, and I stand by it now, and I can produce the numbers to prove it, are that we're at 65 to 70% build-out, and you're claiming 45 or 50 when I look at your numbers. Well, okay, 50, the 50 is a joke, okay? I can provide the data to show that we're at 65 to 70% build-out. But you can't use the old assumptions, because given what's going on right now, this area will just be a disaster with double the current population. It's already pretty bleak. There's people that leave here because they can't take the commutes. The only thing that should be done with recalculating the build-out numbers is to look at the population in the original LCP and treat that as an absolute upper limit for the new LCP, and figure out how to change land uses to get that resident population down, not how to change the population to reflect the desired land uses, because that's the tail wagging the dog. The land uses have to reflect the limit on the population. The only notes that I have right now on the first three tasks, on task 3, Coastside County Water, it says the district's existing capacity for the mid-coast is 1.1 million gallons per day, 33% excess. That's real hard to understand when nobody can get water. They don't have an excess. They don't have any capacity at all right now, except previously contracted, people who bought into phase 1, and priority. But if you don't have phase 1, or you can't call on priority, there is no water available. So this is just plain wrong. The water is not there. Otherwise, I could get off of my well if the water was there. But I can't. There is no water. The excess capacity is 0, and that's what this needs to show. The treatment capacity, sewer treatment capacity. I'm curious how you got the 2.03 million gallons a day from the mid-coast.
I have it all laid out there, really, Joe. I have all my calculations ready. I'd like to talk about it.
Okay, well, in the old 2.0, no, I haven't had time to go through the whole report. I didn't intend to do that, but in the old 2MG plant, GSD had 30% minus some funny little fraction that was sold to Half Moon Bay for farm labor housing south of Half Moon Bay, and MSD had 20%. So 50% of 2MGD is what was here. With the current plant, MSD has less than the 20%. I don't even want to think about how to compute the percentages for not at Half Moon Bay, but I don't think the 2.03 is right. But I would like to point out on record, though, that the plant was overbuilt, and we can pretty much prove that. It was overbuilt in violation of the LCP, and it was overbuilt specifically so that people could then do things like this and say, oh, there's no problem, we can build as much as we want, we got plenty of sewer capacity. And now there's certain people that are attempting to do the same thing with the water system. Roads, no, I think that's the last comment I have tonight. There's a state law that says that a jurisdiction, meaning the city or county, they are not allowed to approve any development at all, not even a house, not any development at all that will cause road conditions to move into LOS F. So if that's enforced, which it's not anywhere, but it's on the books, it's been on the books for at least 20 years when I first got into this stuff, you would basically have to compute when the traffic goes from E to F. And at the point where that happens, there is an absolute ban on issuing any new building permits. That's the state law. And I want to see that enforced. The build out here has to be based on the road capacity. And it's going to be many decades before there's enough money to do anything about the roads. Plus you have another problem with the state law. It basically says you can't widen Highway 1 outside of Half Moon Bay. Actually, I had one last comment on the growth rate, which is, I guess I'm not seeing it on the at a glance thing here, but the growth rate of the proposed of 73 units per year is much too high. That's still double Half Moon Bay's rate. Half Moon Bay, if to use the 1% that Half Moon Bay has, that would be 35, 36, 37 units a year, somewhere in there. And that's appropriate. When Montera Sanitary had no sewer capacity available at all, so there was no building there for more than a decade. The only building going on the coast side was in the Granada Sanitary District. For the preceding 5 years, not the last year. The last year was an anomaly that I can't explain right now. But for the 5 years before that, we went 35 to 45 houses a year in the Granada Sanitary District. That right there is a 2% growth rate in our district, and it's much too high. So we want the 1% that half convey just adopted, and the proportionality rule, because you have all these substandard lots in checkerboard ownerships intentionally to skirt the merger requirements, and basically, you're not going to get any of them merged because virtually none of them are in common ownership. And the way you encourage the property owners to talk to each other and figure out how to merge is you adopt the half-convey proportionality rule. And that is a really important part of this. You're never going to get these things merged without the proportionality rule. And there's widespread support here for that.
I invite you, everybody, to come at the next meeting, May 6th, which we will be talking exclusively about one issue, and that's that 125 units per year and the alternates, including capping days. And then the proportionality will be discussed following the meeting, which will be May 20th and June 3rd.
I'll be there.
Okay. Chuck Kozak?
Chuck Kozak, Chair of the Nichols Community Council, resident of Montero. Again, thank you, George, for the work that you've done on getting us together. I hope we can get some of these points that people have been bringing out clarified as they become data that we need to start relying on. Getting back to the process, I'd like to agree with the comments that April made concerning the general schedule and the way to approach it. I think that's a good approach with the extra meetings. I would also like to point out to people that the Mid-Coast Council, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, will be carrying this as a continuing item. And part of the reason we want to do that is to sort of review what had happened at these meetings, the previous one, and sort of go over the items that will be coming up in the upcoming meetings, just so we can hopefully sort of get some more community input and possibly identify some issues that might need clarification ahead of time. On the specifics, this is actually going back, I think, to the issue that Rick was trying to raise, or part of the issue that Rick was trying to raise, and I'd like a little clarification on it. On the build-out calculations, and especially the references to the merging of the substandard parcels to create standard residential size. My concern was because there's not a specific mention of it in there, was how the calculations for the zoning densities for like the S10 and the S20 were taken into account, where you would have conceivably already, like say, 5,000 square foot parcel, which you may have counted as a conforming parcel, despite the fact it's half of the zoning density, and where you have parcels that are strange sizes that don't easily add up to the zoning density.
I guess both those situations are real. I was careful in my words in my presentation to say merging to the extent allowed by law. And in the case of the R1S17 zoning district, that would be, you would be merging up to a conforming size parcel because it's 5,000 square feet. In the case of what used to be the S10, I guess it's 105, and near more than 96 or something like that, where you have 10,000 square feet and 20,000 square feet respectively, the law would only allow us to merge up to 5,000 square feet. Now, though this may not provide much comfort, the way it works is the only way you can merge to larger than 5,000 square feet if you cannot divide, if you cannot separate the parcels that you're creating by the merger into 5,000 square foot units, so like if you had 2,500 square foot lots, you could merge it to 7,500 square feet, because you could not, along those existing lot lines, end up with a parcel that was less than 5,000 square feet. And the same thing, conceivably, if they were all 2,500, if you merged four, you'd have two 5,000. But sometimes because of the actual numbers involved, you could end up merging four into something like 9,800 or whatever, and still it'd be legal because you couldn't separate it into two 5,000s. But the bottom line is that we're not going to be merging up to conforming size parcels in those places where 20,000 and 10,000 is the minimum parcel size. We are merging to the extent allowed by law, which would mean so that it would be 5,000 square feet, if you could get 5,000 square feet along with the current lot configuration. Sometimes because of the arithmetic or the configuration, it may be 7,500 or close to 10,000. But does that answer the question a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess then what I would ask for then would be some sort of clarification for this report, that is exactly what is happening, because I think that actually is a very high issue of community concern. In fact, we are looking at a development rate that's about 180% of the zoning density
Well, when you say
within the extent
clarification,
district.
that's occurred just so that I
Well,
understand.
that's how you calculated your build-up.
No, I mean, just so that I understand, you mean a clarification that even with merger program, we may not be merging up to
Yes.
minimum parcel size in areas like Silicon and but they are parallels to
Right.
Okay. This is something I understand.
Yeah, the case in point, just looking at the numbers that you have here, say, for the APN 48, which is mostly in the S10 district. There's a little bit that says 17.
48 would be underlined, it's not, but it's 10 would be
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the numbers here. Yes, 9. You show 88 undeveloped, non-conforming parcels. Now those parcels vary a lot. They could be as small as 25. A lot of them could be 4,000 or 4,000 also. So I guess it's probably, I think what people would be wanting to see would be what would be built on numbers if these neighborhoods would be developed to their zoning standards. Because I think that's what a lot of people are expected to see when we talk about
I see exactly, I see what you're saying. When I may say conform, I may say conform in the context of what is allowed to be included, which is a deviation from, the actions of contradiction when I say, conforming means up to the minimum parcel size. So I think you're right, the clarification is necessary. And it's something short of what the parcel size is, but it's almost what
then that way at least we got sort of the numbers that people were expecting. The other note that's somewhat related to that too is there was another reference in here concerning the calculation of the average house size, which when those calculations were done, those also took into effect the different zoning, combined the different zoning districts, so that the FAR that comes out is not necessarily we may have to go into that more detail later. The other request I had was that in terms of the zoning designations, maybe we should start using the new ones just so people start getting used to it. I can't even remember what they are.
Right, yeah, that's a good point.
The other mention I wanted to make was to people, there was some mention at the beginning of the meeting about people who were, you actually mentioned it when you were talking about future tasks. The definition of the COSI Design Review Committee is working on the design review criteria currently. That's going to merge with this process later on this year. They are working on those in a series of public meetings which are held typically the fourth Thursday of each month. The next one is going to be the 25th of this month. It's at 4 p.m., I believe, at the Sheriff's Substation in Moss Beach. That's Thursday, the 25th, and they are going through and working on getting the committee's recommendations for the design review criteria together. So if people want to get in on that process at kind of the ground level, those should be the meetings they should be coming to. There are 2 other comments I had, and these are for future items, but they're ones you might want to address now, so we'll get to them. The maps, the map that's being used for Section 8 for potential new commercial development sites, map A2. You might want to compare that with the new sensitive habitats map, because you have some crossover on some of the areas that you're proposing for commercial development are also designated as wetland.
Yes,
sensitive
it's
habitat.
acknowledged in the text, I think, with a bullet shape parcel across the second parcel, that there is a stream running down the middle. So you're right, actually, I should clarify some of that stuff. You're right, okay.
Then the other thing on 13, the map for section 13, the protection of the PAD and the RA lands. The raw cert property is not identified.
It's a quirky, that property is designated public recreation, and I was looking at properties that are zoned open space and agriculture.
The other question I had was the house height limit that you're proposing for those. Is that for within the urban rural boundary only, or for all PAD and RMCZ?
It's actually a hybrid of both. It's for the project, what I have shown as the project area, which is what we showed about last time. Basically, the project area follows, generally follows the urban rural boundary. However, there are areas, because of their location, that they're so tied in with the mid-coast, even though they're formerly rural, like this open space and ag area that's totally ensconced in the residential area, that I'm including that as in the project area, because it's functionally tied, because of location, to the surrounding residential area. So, to give a short answer, primarily it's following the urban rural boundary, but when there's situations where proximity is so close to the developed residential area, I've included that as being subject to the height. So that means these 2 parcels, which are outside the residential, the urban rural boundary, but within the project area, because of their location, would be subject to it.
Then one other point I had to do with the tasks 16 and 17, which had to do with coastal trail. Both have to do with trails. There are some maps and stuff that are being developed as part of the recreational needs assessment. And I think it would be good to have a note in here that those efforts can be dovetailed in the future. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Catherine Slater Carter.
Good evening. Catherine Slater Carter. I'm on the Montero Sanitary District and also the Mid-Coast Council. I also want to extend my deep thanks to the county, and particularly George and the folks who have worked on this project. When Rick Loban and I and a few others founded the Planning and Zoning Subcommittee about 6 years ago, we started asking to have this done, and we're very thankful that it's getting done. I have a few comments. Some are detailed and some are not. I want to start out with a comment about the process. Consensus is a nice concept. Minority opinion is a nice concept. but in fact, the intent of the Coastal Act and the local coastal program is far more important than consensus. There are higher standards of review than just what the folks around him want. And I think it's very important to keep that in mind. When you try and drive here on a Saturday afternoon, when you try and come home, or try and get from Montero to Moss Beach, or Montero to Half Moon Bay, and you discover the number of tourists and people who are here enjoying the coast from all over the state, you realize that the importance that this area has. And under the Coastal Act, we are under a body of state law that seeks to preserve it, and it doesn't talk about consensus within the community to make everyone happy in enforcing the Coastal Act. That is not its intent, and I think we need to be very clear on that. I have a couple questions. George, there are some data corrections that I'm concerned about. One of which April brought up, and that's the numbers for the Cal-Am water. I was just reading some figures, and when the moratorium was imposed, there were about 1,600 houses in Montero, and it was 100 to 200 gallons a minute short for those 1,600 houses. We've had about 200 houses go in, and they haven't added any new water supplies. So I don't know, that was about 30% then. So I don't know how we could have gotten to 27%. I would be happy to check the numbers at the sanitary district. As you know, we are taking strong stands at the Public Utilities Commission to protect the ratepayers in Montero and Moss Beach. So we have access to some data, and I'll be happy to get that to you. Or you could call George Irving, our district administrator, for verification of the data. The rural residential, I'm concerned that your numbers are low. It appears that you say there are about 40 houses, and yet just on essentially two streets, Alamo and Avery, I can count about 18 houses. So I know there's an awful lot more than that involved in the Portola Estates. And then there are some other houses that have been put in up on the hill and around to the north end of the RMCZ. Beyond that, back to Chuck and Rick's concern about actual versus the zoning theoretical. In the RMCZ rural residential, in about 1986, a house, although it's zoned for a minimum of one house per 5 acres, there's a house with a well and a septic system that was built on a third of an acre. Currently, there's a proposal for the north end of the rural residential area for a house and a septic system on slightly over an acre. So that's 1/5 the size of the zone minimum. As you know, this area is rife with those terrible substandard lots, and I'm concerned that the numbers are going to get out of kilter real fast. As a matter of fact, on the north end of Montero, inside the urban-rural boundary, there is an area zoned RM, and I believe it's in the rural residential area, but it is served by water and sewer. And so these houses are going in on some as small as 5,000 square foot lots. And I would really like to see this area rezoned to something that is more in keeping with, say, residential estates that can be served by sewer and water, because the sewer district is in a terrible quandary. You're making assumptions that we're not going to be serving rural residential or RM, and yet we are being asked to by builders. And so we feel honor-bound to enforce the LCP, and yet we are in a position where it would be very difficult to do so. In fact, we did have one proposal about a year ago to extend our sewer pipes over the urban-rural boundary, and this board chose not to. but there are conflicting parts of the local coastal program, one that says we can't extend our lines over the urban-rural boundary, and another policy that says we can. And so it's very important to get those clarified. But in a short solution would be to look at the development patterns and maybe rezone them, so that people who do have smaller holdings within the urban-rural boundary can build, but have to build on larger lots. One of the, having been on the Planning and Zoning Committee for a while, I've noticed that there are some builders, some of whom are in the audience, who actually work with the Mid-Coast Council and the Planning and Zoning Committee to, even through lot line adjustments and so on, work to get their lots as close as possible for conforming. And I want the public to know there are lot owners and developers out there who do that, and that this council and the community is deeply appreciative. But there are some who also do not. And I believe it's important. Leonard Warren talked about the importance of strong proportionality rules. I believe we should adopt what Half Moon Bay has adopted and successfully adopted, and that is that the size of your house is equal to for a non-conforming lot, is equal to the percentage that lot is of the conforming size. So if you have 5,000 square foot zoning and you have a 2,500 square foot lot, you get to build a house that's only half the size of what's allowed under the zoning, regardless of floor area ratios or lot coverage.
No, it's
or
actually,
anything.
the floor, what you're saying is a concept that is correct. If you plug in the numbers, if the zoning is 5,000 square feet and the parcel is 2,500 square feet, it's half. And if the FAR is 0.5, you take half of that, which makes it 0.25.
Right, but right now you get a bonus for a garage.
Oh, no, I'm right, but I'm saying it does tie the FAR. It's 0.25, and then you get 200 feet, 200 square feet.
And in Half Moon Bay, you don't get that garage allowance. And it essentially gives people a strong incentive to merge their lots. And another thing that I'd like to see, I don't know how it can be done, I'm sure county council would have a fit, but an alternative would be that the substandard lots wait until all the conforming lots are built out. And then you just go down, the closer it is to conforming, after all the conforming parcels have been built, the sooner you get your permit. So the smallest lots are last.
Let's say, I don't want to cut you off, but I just want to say, that's important. Let's say that we make 20.
Okay, no, I won't forget it, but I want to get that
No, I mean,
thought out there.
It's good to get it out now, but I hope you're going to be a little over top on this.
Life is unpredictable. I always eat dessert first. But those are some of my comments. So about my differerences or any differences that the community has with you on data, should we just get that to you directly?
No, well, actually, let me give you a little comment. I've been thinking about this. I've been hearing speakers, one by one, who have serious concerns and questions about the data, and I was initially thinking, well, work with you individually, but then I thought, as I was hearing more and more, that it may be in everybody's best interest, that maybe, I was thinking next week, when we talk about this contingency plan, that those people who are interested in the data presentation and the data calculations, that we have a meeting where I can sit and describe what I've done, and people can bring their resources with them, and I'll bring my resources, and we hopefully can maybe start a process to get kind of a meeting in the mind. If it doesn't take one meeting, we can meet again. This is probably something where the people who are concerned about the data facts would be a subset of the people who turn out normally at workshops at maybe a smaller venue like the Sheriff's Substation or Seton Hospital, your council room. It may be good that we could just have a working session, because here we're dealing with facts. We're not dealing with values or recommendations, and I, like you, want to get the data right, and I would like you to understand the assumptions that I made, and then you could tell me where you see there's an error, or you say, well, I didn't think about that, maybe that's okay. You know what I mean? So maybe a working session, and it may take more than one working session through this process to get the data right. So that's, initially I did have the same thoughts as you, and maybe I'll work on these individual people, but then I thought, why don't we all get together and just kind of make this a process where we could share our calculation approach and see if we can come to some agreement. So I'm tentatively thinking of maybe meeting next week in the evening, same time, and I'll try to line up a place to just talk about data, and I'll sit down at a table, explain what I did, and people could, talk about their reaction in terms of how they think it should be done differently or whatever.
I for one, would happily attend a meeting like that and try and work to get my data together, even if it means going through and taking pictures so we can do a physical count. Because I think we have to start with the correct data to move forward to the correct projections. And that's part of the problem that we had, is the huge amount of time between the initial LCP and the current review, and it gives people false expectations. And I'd love to see the appeal process, my need to appeal projects even. I'd like to have another life, actually.
And I just want to do a different view, or slightly different view. Though the data is important, and it's a good baseline, it's a good basis if there's going to be future land use change to change density as a phase 2 of this project. I don't think, though, in our quest to get the data right, that we should slow down the process of considering the 125 building permits a year versus half million days. I'd like that to go on schedule, because I think we have enough data to make policy decisions in that regard. And so what I would be hopeful for is would be hopeful that we could follow the schedule and develop as a group the minority and majority proposals for the limit on houses per year, the approach to merging substandard lot, the whole issue of merging substandard lots, and also the development controls for non-conforming parcels vis-a-vis the proportionality versus what the county is doing now. I would like that to go forward, and even if it may be paralleling our quest to refine the data, get the data right, where there's problems. What I'm hoping for is, I think that we're all right with the data, we're just looking at it differently. I'd like to, through this process, all of us kind of get on the same page, so we're all looking at it kind of the same way, which, I mean, it's like what they say about economists, it's probably, your numbers are correct, my numbers are correct, and Chuck's numbers are correct, but they're all different. And so we need to talk about it,
And I agree that I think it's very important to get this process through on a schedule. I don't feel that you're trying to rush it through at all.
And I just wouldn't want those other topics to be hostage to when we work out the data.
No, I think the data is part of it, but it's a three-legged stool, and none of it will work without all of it, but it shouldn't hold itself up. Thank you.
Thanks. We can have a lot of makers council. I'll call it Jenny Law.
I am Jenny Loft. I'm with PCAC. George, I just want to thank you for doing this incredible project. I know it takes a lot of work and commitment, and we really appreciate that, and just being fair. Caroline was up here earlier and talking about the caretaker's quarters, and I wanted just to add that under task 1, that there's under the substandard or non-conforming parcels, we've prepared some written, account of what we're talking about tonight, and we'll be submitting that to you either tonight or, faxing it to you sometime this week. So I'll just read the one area where I think we need to talk about, where in Princeton, substandard lots and non-conforming parcels should be viewed differently from other areas of the Mid-Coast. Giving zoning allowances for 65% lot coverage of parcels smaller than 5,000 square feet may still be developed with a structure that would adequately accommodate a small business. Allowing for such development will enhance and diversify the sizes and types of businesses that would flourish in Princeton. The PCAC requests that, like other codes that pertain to the Mid-Coast, this code does not apply to Princeton due to the uniqueness of the community. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to your facts and we'll feed that into when we talk about in particular. We have one night that we're dedicated to the caretaker quarters, Massachusetts, I look forward to your facts.
Yeah. And also, I just wanted to add that our Princeton Citizens Advisory Committee's membership has been meeting the last few weeks to really review your work, and we've outlined, each of the tasks, our concerns, and we brought it to our membership. So I just want to let you know that we're working hard on it as well.
I
So
invite you to continue to participate.
we will be here. Thank you again.
Okay. Now, Paul. Okay.
Good evening. My name is Paul Pernovic. I'm on the Mid-Coast Community Council, and I'm also in the Montreal Sanitary District. And I serve as the alternate for MSD on the Sewer Authority Mid-Coast side. So I'm going to talk primarily about water and sewer issues. A couple of overall comments. I'd like to echo the remarks made by others about the thoroughness with which this report has been put together, and I'd like to thank the county and you, George, for that personally. And I apologize for not doing that when I saw you over at county planning the other day, and instead just fired off a question at you. I think for some of the things it would be extremely helpful if you could, for the material that is distributed, compare the current LCP information with the proposed changes. I think Leonard is the only person who happened to come equipped tonight with the current LCP document, and he was courteous enough to let me borrow it. But those of us that don't have it completely memorized, we're not able to immediately compare the current LCP build-out numbers, for example, with those that are shown here. Another thing that I think would be extremely helpful to us, in particular on the residential trends, is to have the 1980, 1990, and 2000 census data that would show the population trends in the Montero, Moss Beach, and El Granada communities, as well as the trends in the family size. And a question that might be appropriate to ask ourselves as structures are getting larger and potentially people are having either their children live with them longer or older relatives move back in with them, will the actual population per household continue to increase at the trend we've seen over the last 20 years. In 1980, the LCP used 2.6 residents per household, and the number you give in here is 2.78. That's about an 8% increase, and if it continues like that for the next 20 years, the population is going to be 8% bigger than would be projected here. In your table on LCP build-out, you pretty thoroughly enumerate the specific zoning districts, the residential zoning districts, and you do include the second units that would be permitted and the caretaker quarters. However, what's not included here is the existing residential units in the non-residential zoned areas that are shown on the next page. There apparently are existing 90 units. On pages 4 and 5 of section 1, this is the chart on page 4. It shows the number of dwelling units in build-out, and it looks like it is analyzing just the residentially zoned areas. And they're existing, either existing non-conforming uses, for example, in the coastside commercial recreation and waterfront zoning districts where there are grandfathered residential units, as well as some existing residential units in the commercial zones. At the very least, the existing count, I think, should be included because those are not going to go away, I don't think, and they'll still be here at build-out. Do you see that point I'm making?
Well, the point you're making, I think the second table does include these units, residential units along all zone areas.
Right. The
And
second table.
those are developed existing units.
That's right. And those developed existing units are probably going to continue to exist at build-out, and they are not reflected in the first table.
I see.
So that is an extra, it's only 1.5% roughly, so it's not a huge difference, but it is a difference. So that's.
I appreciate it.
I was confused. This is on task 2. This is the table you have on task 2 that shows the developed parcels. I'm not sure how to read that first section. Single substandard lots.
Okay.
Are there really 214 developed parcels with substandard parcels?
Yes.
Because we've been hearing all along, and during the house size, during the R1 zoning regulation revision, we were being told that the substandard lots were not a problem because very few of those were being developed, and 200 is an awful large number compared to very few. So I just wondered, is that really an accurate number?
I'll go back and check that. Yes, best my knowledge it is, and we have the count, we have all the maps, and we'll go back and check that.
Okay. I listened while you were talking about the planned agricultural districts, and my comments that I've written out here are that the narrative sounds extremely nice, that we have prime agricultural soils, and that the PAD zoning district is to encourage that those remain in agricultural production. But let's face reality. What we have out there are basically large houses with areas that are not being farmed. There's no productive agriculture going on. I think Catherine suggested we might want to just admit that those are residential estates. They certainly have nothing to do with productive use of the agricultural soils. That may be bad because it's contrary to the intent of the Coastal Act, but if that's the reality that the county is going to permit, let's not put window dressing on it that just falsifies the facts on the ground.
The proposal is that in those areas, the height of the house be reduced to 28 feet, like
Right.
residential areas, and that the floor area ratio of 0.53 be applied.
All right.
So basically, so we wouldn't have as many of the big houses.
I appreciate the proposals. It's just the narrative that said the PAD zoning district is here to protect agriculture and prime agricultural soils, when we know in reality that that's not all that's happening. Let's have the narrative match the reality, or else have the county enforce some realities that match what the Coastal Act says, which is what the reality is supposed to be. I want to spend the next several minutes on water and sewer. This is a really very problematic area. When you look at the 1980, when you look at the background reports for water and sewer before the LCP was adopted, they did some actual analysis of real water and sewer usage rates, and then they came up with a range which basically gave a low value and high value. It's basically about 20% above and below what the actual usage was. So for example, for water, the range in the current LCP is from 93 to 134 gallons per day per capita. And for sewer, it's from 70 to 100 gallons per day per capita. The data you've gotten from the various agencies indicates that we've been very good at conserving water and therefore sewer generation. And so our actual usage is below, in some cases below, the low end of those ranges. And yet the high ends of those ranges, which are about 50% bigger than the low end, 100 is about 50% bigger than 70, 134 point something is about 50% bigger than 93. It's the numbers at the high end of those ranges that are multiplied by the projected population in total to give the water demand and the sewer demand that were used to size both the Crystal Springs project, the Crystal Springs pipeline, the El Granada water transmission pipeline, the Sewer Authority Mid-Coast site expansions. So we basically have 50% too much capacity built in just by the way the arithmetic is done. And so if you're going to take these numbers as reflecting actual use, and we think that those are likely to reflect future trends, future demand, then I think we should revise the build-out infrastructure needs down, because otherwise what we've done is violate Coastal Act Policy 30250, I think that's the correct one, which says that infrastructure shall be limited so that you don't have growth inducement. And what we have done instead is to build in growth inducement. To make matters worse, the various districts, when I set up their assessment districts, after using the high-end numbers to multiply for capacity, divided that capacity by the average use, which now inflates. If you divide 100 times something by 85, you get 118%. And so that inflates the number of connections as well. So
Aside from,
games have been played all along here.
I know, as I said, let's recognize, just for discussion, there's been gains. In terms of picking one number over the other, would you concur with the assumption in terms of demand, based on the 7 years, what we got from the agencies, what the current demand is, would be the appropriate number to use in this type of analysis? Still mindful that there's someone else has been messing with the numbers and determining the capacity of pipes and things like that. But just for this analysis, would you recommend that we take the empirical number, which is reflecting current use, or that we do this inflated number, which is being used for determining pipe size?
Well, that's a very interesting philosophical question, because we're basically asking, 20 years from now, are people's water needs going to increase or decrease or stay the same? And that's very hard to predict. And yet, if their needs increase and we don't have the capacity available, we end up in a shortage situation. And basically, the way infrastructure is managed is by cycles of feast and famine. When you have plenty of water, you build to use it all up. And then you come around to a drought, and you say, oh, gee, we've got to get more from somewhere, instead of having built to the lean years. And we do that with everything. It's the reason that we just had the big crash in the .com committee. So I don't know what the right answer is. But I do think...
Data study group, that's what I'm supposed to call this, the data study group.
I will come to that. I do think that there should be very strong enforcement of the capacity available during the lean years. And that if capacity is allocated based on drought years, you should never permit additional connections for either water or sewer to be issued during years when there's plenty of water, because then you are basically forcing the entire community into a crisis condition the next time you have a shortage. And that is not fair to current residents, and it's not fair to newly developed parcels and the people who come to buy those parcels. And it's effectively a way that water is being stolen and misused for the sake of developers. They want to take water away from you in the future. That's not the way they phrase it. But they'll come in and say, we've got a water crisis, you have to put in low-flow toilets, you have to stop irrigating your lawns, etc. If people had a reasonable expectation for the amount of water they were going to use, they shouldn't be forced to give that up to benefit development that is not already anticipated and planned for in the policies.
Just to provide a bit of perspective, what we're trying to do, and what we do with these study groups, is one, determine the best methodology to quantify or project demand and build out, and also the best methodology to evaluate capacity and build out. And then that question will be raising some of the points you're saying, not as much as the gains and we play with pipes or whatever, but the question, should we be assuming that the current household consumption per day for a projected number, or should it be something else? And this is, I don't want to talk about.
Okay, good. I hope the person from Princeton who spoke up about the caretaker units is accurate, and that caretaker units will remain small, will serve as caretaker units, and that they will meet the function in the Princeton community that they've been advertised as meeting, which is to make sure that there is some resident population to reduce crime in that community during the off hours. However, it's somewhat contradicted when you see a Fred Herring structure advertised, actually featured in an article in the San Jose Mercury News Sunday real estate section that describes essentially a waterfront home, and it writes it up as if you have the use of 3 entire floors as the home, with this little mention, oh, it's zoned commercial. And it describes having, commercial kitchen facilities. Those are not things you fit in a 300 square foot caretaker unit. And so if the reality is going to be that the Fred Herring structures are advertised in the San Jose Mercury News and sold for $900,000 as a luxury waterfront home, unless the county prevents those from being converted to large residences, things that came in under the caretaker umbrella are going to end up putting at least the same demand as any other residents in the community. And I hope that the county can act on that before that gets out of hand.
Well, just on that note, as I think I mentioned to a few other people, we will be dedicating the September 9th meeting exclusively to talking about residential units and non-residential zones, and much of the discussion of that will be on caretaker quarters and the limits put around. So
Okay.
I invite you to attend the September 9th meeting as well.
Okay. Getting back to water, if the water needs are based on the, among other things, the residential parcel demand and build out, and the way the county has allowed development is by individual domestic water wells on hundreds of parcels. If there are 6,000 total parcels and 300 wells, those 300 wells are providing 5% of the demand. Do we expect that demand will be continued to be provided through domestic wells? Or do we expect, since we've built that demand into the water generation table 2.17, water demand and build out, are we expecting that those homes will be served from the public water systems and taken off wells? Or do the wells basically provide an extra bonus of water capacity there, which again has the problem of being an incentive for growth beyond build out? Actually, that brings me to LCP policy 2.29. That brings me to LCP policy 2.29, which is priority water capacity, and the related table 2.17. Table 2.17 shows for the Montero Moss Beach area, but it's mostly residential demand. So I don't have a lot of quibbles over that. However, in the Coast County Water District, and fortunately we still have at least one of the directors here, and unfortunately Ed Schmidt left, about 40% of the total demand is priority use capacity, and that is not counted on a per household basis, but instead is estimated at rates varying from 1,500 to 4,700 gallons per day per acre. Now, we have a minor problem here. Suppose you have a 5,000 square foot parcel on which you have an Ace Hardware store in El Granada. That has a relatively low water demand. That's about 1/8 of an acre. If you take an adjacent vacant parcel and put up an 8-unit apartment building, 6 or 8 unit apartment building, I think that might fit in the C1 zone. Now, all of a sudden, you've gone to a density of roughly.
Our proposal is that it doesn't.
Well, this is why it's an issue. All of a sudden, you've gone to a possible density there of 64 units per acre. Now, I admit that an apartment is not going to have the typical population density as a single-family residence. The LCP estimate in the 1980 LCP was 2.1, but the water demand for an 8-unit apartment building on a per acre basis is going to be significantly higher than the number that's given in the priority water use table. Similarly, and again, this is something where I'm disappointed that Ed's left already. I said nice things about Ed at the CCWD meetings, but I don't mean to be criticizing in absentia tonight. There's currently a project that's on appeal to the Coastal Commission for their El Granado water transmission pipeline.
that pipeline comes up from Half Moon Bay and into the El Granada area. And it's justified in part to serve the residential build-out in the El Granada area and to serve the priority water uses in the Princeton area, which are marine-related industrial and the visitor-serving commercial uses. But when they did the water generation estimates in their engineering report, they put in all of the build-out water capacity from table 2.17, and that includes a huge amount for agriculture and floriculture. And I'd like you to point out for us on the Mid-Coast map which areas in the Mid-Coast that would be served by the El Granada water transmission pipeline are zoned for floriculture and agriculture and could make use of water brought up through that pipeline. It's my assertion that the only parcels that are eligible for that water are located along the Route 92 corridor. And so to include that water demand in the projections for the El Granada water transmission pipeline is a flaw in the analysis and a reason that item has been appealed.
That may be true, and I'm not going to point out parcels because I think we've gotten a bit off track, but I think I do want you to be part of the study report data. What I tried to do is look at residential demand, build out, look at water supply and build out based on data, and see what the match is. I'm hearing from different people that my deficits are too low and surpluses are too high, and we need to look at that. I wasn't looking at water supply for floriculture, I wasn't looking at water supply for commercial, I was looking at water supply for residential.
For residential, okay. Well, in fact, that brings up an issue of LCP policy 2.11. And this is a policy that I don't think the county has necessarily done as good a job of carrying out as in fact, I'm not even sure it's in the list. But that's a policy that says that the county will require the water purveyors to monitor the usage rates by zoning district in the non-residential zoning areas, so that you would actually know what is the water demand for
This ties into
commercial.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm not sure if I know the answer right off the top of my head, but I indicated earlier there's a good case study that the LCP assigns tasks to the county. Apparently, this is a task they assign to the county for us to get this something
From the districts, right?
I will research to see if we've done that. First of all, maybe in my report already, I did the work last summer, and we'll see the assessment. Okay.
Okay, and I'm going to give you my notes back so you have all this stuff sort of in writing. And my last thing is actually a forward reference to task 9. Right. Mid-Coast Community Council had a special committee or task force some years back when the Half Moon Bay Airport Master Plan was being updated. At that time, the proposal, there were several alternatives that were proposed. All 3 of the alternatives that were given and that were proposed to go forward to the county eliminated this displaced threshold. That setback of 763 feet. And the proposals in all 3 of the alternatives in the master plan eliminate that. It would mean essentially that the runway threshold would be at the physical end of the runway. And so instead of being able to eliminate some parcels from the airport overlay, if you push it 763 feet back into Princeton, you basically eat up everything down the waterfront. The Mid-Coast Community Council was vehemently opposed to that particular proposal and came up with a 4th alternative that we presented to the county, which said, leave the displaced threshold where it is. But you should certainly be aware that there is going through the county process a revision of the master plan that would eliminate that displaced threshold. And if that's adopted, it's exactly the wrong thing to do to reduce the airport overlay area. Instead, it would be necessary to increase the airport overlay area. And that's the end of my comments.
I should qualify, and I will be talking about this mid-summer or late summer. The proposal to remove the red area from the AO zone presumes that the displaced runway will continue. And so that needs to be made clear if it's not clear already, and we'll talk about that in,
Okay, well, that needs to be coordinated with the master plan update and the environmental work that's being done in the master plan for the
I've been,
airport.
August 5th,
With-
I've been
with Dave
coordinating, my
Carpenter.
understanding is that the current proposal is to leave the displaced runway exactly as it is.
Okay, well, and the county's actually listening to the Mid-Coast Community Council for change.
And so, but by the time,
Sorry.
by the time August 5th comes along, we'll have that ironed out.
Okay, thank you.
Jack McCarthy.
I'm Jack McCarthy. I'm a resident of Half Moon Bay. I'm a member of the Half Moon Bay Planning Commission, although I'm speaking as a citizen tonight. I also want to thank you very much for that report. It's very impressive. There's really a lot of great work in there. I want to re-emphasize your findings about the traffic projections that go out to the year 2010. I think it's really, as you go into the LCP, I don't want to talk about data, but just the context of where we're going with the community. If you're saying that we're looking at gridlock in the commuting afternoon hours with level of service for Highway 92 to 280 at level F, Highway 1 Miramontes to El Granada level F, Highway 1 El Granada to Montero level of service E, Montero Pacifica F, Pacifica San Francisco
I just
F.
want to clarify, this is just a summary document. There's one little point in there. Not that entire stretch will be at levels F, but on that segment, there is a sub-segment that will be at level F. So I can say is the most congested portion of those stretches of highways will be at level F. You may have level D, E, F, and then E back up to D for that stretch, but there is an F section, so I reported the work.
Okay. Well, it really alarmed me when you said that, and you also said they're going to be very difficult conditions, worse than they are now, as we all know, are very difficult today. I just hope as we go ahead with our planning, we just keep the context in mind, where the LCP is taking us. What we ultimately want to do is we listen to all the input from everybody, and we all want to have the most livable community we can. And once again, thank you.
Thank you for coming. Great. Okay, Rick Lohman, did you want to return?
Yeah, I'll do some quick things here. Again, staying specifically on these three items here. I think one of the points you brought up earlier was on the substandard lot mergers, and an account was some dangers about how ownership will be determined. If this goes on for about a year or so, roughly, before we move toward a formal document, it seems like there's the policy that I think you or somebody mentioned that you would just immediately split all these substandard lots into separate ownerships immediately, knowing that there was a merger plan. Is there
With any
some?
impending merger program, that is an inherent risk with merger, that this is a public meeting, public gathering, where their thoughts are open, and some people may take notice that this is maybe on the horizon. And during the period while we're planning for a comprehensive merger and the point when the board gives us the direction to do it, you are correct. That's an opportunity for property owners to disaggregate their constituent substandard lots.
Okay.
It's an inherent problem associated with merging, though merging is still a more effective way to control substandard lots than not merging.
It just seems like if we're playing with numbers, I think that's a real danger, like we said, in our projections, that we just can't automatically assume everything that's currently mergeable will be mergeable in the final number set.
That's true.
Another quick point was, is there anything going to be in the policy, or are we going to be discussing what's happened here recently, which is a sale of a lot which splits something into non-conforming parcels, which is actually, creating more problems.
What I think we should do is
And we'll have to run out.
not very soon, it's May 20th, if we make successful progress on the 125 or 50 units per year or or 70, whatever, that item. Successful progress on that on May 6th. We're going to carry it over to May 20th and then open up on May 20th and particularly all of June 3rd, the whole issue of substandard lots and non-conforming parcels. And I think that's what we should talk about.
Okay,
I mean, that case study would be important in our discussions then.
Okay.
I mean, I'd like to know more.
So there seems to be the possibility that we can actually create more substandard lots than we have now. We can bring it up now.
Yeah.
Okay. There was a policy, and I'm not sure if it was being discussed in Half Moon Bay or they're thinking about it. This idea, I don't know what the official word is, but does retiring a substandard lot if you want to build on another one that equals the 5,000? There's a really neat term for that, like it's a good term for everything. But if you want to build on a substandard lot, you have to find another one and you retire that one as a part. The net is 5,000 square feet.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They do address it with banking. I know what you're
It's a
talking
banking or something like that. I just wanted to see where that was brought up.
about. I think what you would say is if a person has a substandard, 2,500 square foot parcel, you would allow the person to build on a 2,500 square foot parcel if he or she purchased another one that's not contiguous and retired it by a deed restriction that would not go. So the 5,000 square feet.
That's how you get to 5,000 square
Right.
feet.
A similar concept is discussed in the report.
Okay. Two quickies here. In the areas where you say you're reducing things from, I think it's 36 feet to 28 feet, whatever that was, will there be some restriction? Because we had several projects come through where they go right back in and squish 3 stories. We say 2 stories in parentheses. But we've had at least 2 proposals recently to squish 3 stories back into there.
What I'm going to do is
We do
model
some
it.
restriction.
What I would like to do is model it after the height restriction came out of the house size regulations. What we did is we did it with the, as you were part of a comprehensive program for residential zone areas where we took that on, and I don't think we're doing stories as much as the number of feet. Basically, the theme here is that these other areas that they may be zoned RLCC, they're tied within they're part of the Midcoast fabric, because of their location, part of the Midcoast, and they should have the same height limits as residential. That's kind of, when we get to that, I'll look at the details. It's kind of,
Okay. Because we're getting squishing more people in.
I think it's a little tricky. I made it kind of general to most of those 28 feet. There is a permanent language, and the slope is a certain, maybe 30 or something like that. We'll bring that out.
Okay. The last little item, we brought up the CCAG traffic reports. Well, Jack was here. It had 2 ways. The big computer model, which I think you have some examples of in your report. I believe in the CCAG modeling for the year 2010, they talked about Highway 92 and Highway 1 as being the 2 worst highways. And the way they described it, as I recall, was it would reach factor 2. And factor 1 was you were 100% at capacity. And the way they phrased it, this was factor 2, so you would be essentially in double gridlock. It wasn't just like your gridlock, but it was
I see what you're saying.
more
Like the worst
people.
case of LOSF is 1.0, but you're saying it'd be like 1.2.
And they're saying it was factor 2. You know,
2.0,
280
which
will
is
be
over 1, yeah.
Yeah, 280 will be at factor 1 then, which is right on capacity, solid cars, but moving. And 92 and Highway 1 would be at factor 2, which is literally double gridlock.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think, I'd have to go back to the chart. I know it's right in here.
Yeah, you had a little diagram.
A little diagram with
Little diamonds.
whatever. But I think it just said, it gave an LOS number that is accepted, I think, as F, even though it's over 1.0.
Yeah.
Which, according to your nomenclature, would be now phase 2, whatever it's going to be at level 2.
The cars are starting to stack on top of each other. These things. Thanks.
Anyone else who wishes to speak? I think I've covered everybody. Well, through the course of this meeting, we've got a lot of comments, and a lot are related to the numbers, how numbers were presented, what should have been presented, questions about methodology used to get those numbers. omissions, a lot of things related to data, which is, as I said earlier, unlike the other topics which are value-oriented and people have strong feelings about or whatever, data should be fact and should be correct. And so what I'm going to call for, consistent with this theme of contingency plan for spillover items, however, I think it would be valuable if we have like a data working group that can work with me on, and hopefully have a meeting of the minds on methodology used in data. And I'd like to start out a meeting where I can explain what I did so people at least can comprehend, and I can explain it slowly and show you where all my sources are, and then we can kind of critique that, and people say, well, you should have done it this way, or your data is like based on 97, and really here's a report from 2000, did you know we had it, and that type of stuff. And hopefully, through a couple of sessions, we can get the data so that more people will accept it as representing fact. I'd like that process to parallel the actual tackling of the substantive tasks, which at the next meeting will be the May 20th meeting, the May 6th meeting, where in this room, and hopefully with a facilitator, I haven't heard about the state of the contract yet, but with a facilitator, we are going to take on 125 units per year, 50 units per year, 35 units per year, 73 units per year, whether we should distribute them amongst community based on population, area, or vacant land, all those, and discuss the dynamics of the problem, which some members of the committee have said that with construction activity, there's traffic impacts from the construction activity and drainage impacts, other things that go with it. So that's all going to be, we're going to exclusively talk about that on May 6th. So what my proposal is we stick with the May 6th workshop. Hopefully we'll have a facilitator. We talk, just one second. Hopefully we'll talk exclusively about this growth cap per year for houses. In the meantime, I'd like the people who have the concern about the data, who spoke tonight about it, to attend. I'm going to try to, at least give me your names tonight and your phone number, and I'm going to try to arrange a meeting, hopefully at the sheriff's substation at 7:30 next Monday night to talk about this. So, and Chuck, you had something to say. Come on up if you want.
No, just I can just yell. For the meeting on May 6th, we're going to be talking about the growth rate alternatives.
Right.
Will you be able to provide some examples of how that distributed
Yes.
thing will work in terms of like population?
Oh, I'm planning to do that, yes. I actually, it's in the report, but I'll go over it again. What I did is I did three scenarios for discussion. I said basically, if you did it by area, here's how much Ontario, Moss Beach, Gilbert will get. If you did it by population, here's how that would break down. And if you did it by number of vacant lots, here's how it break down. But hopefully maybe we can have a graphic. Because if we do have 2 weeks from that, then down we only have 7 days. Anyway, I'm going to refresh my memory. What I'm going to do, I did the data stuff. I did all my data work probably 5 to 3 months ago, and I'm going to bone up on it the next 4 or 5 days, and hopefully start out with a presentation, and we'll just work around the table to try to kind of be on the same page with the data over a series of meetings. So I'd like, here's the other thing, this is more for public outreach. The way I have done this is I've taken the mailing lists from key mid-coast projects of the last 4 or 5 years and amassed a good-sized mailing list, about 200 plus people. And I have invited them to this meeting. I know today's the tax day, so I think that's the reason to turn out. And then people have been able to call me to get copies of the report or whatever. If you think that someone should be on that list, and you don't know if they're on the list or not, please give me the name, because if they're not on the list, I'll put them on the list. So if there's anyone that you would like to be added, because I was talking to Helen today, she had concern that certain property owners aren't going to be notified at this level, and I explained how we're well before the amendment level. but Helen, you may have some property owners you would like me to notify, so, and other people may have other people they want me to notify, so please give me names of people who you think may be interested in this process, so I can put them on the mailing list and they can be involved. It's been mainly the people who were involved in other projects. Everything has been sent to the press, so it's probably been right to the Half Moon Bay Review, but it's a lot of word of mouth as well, so if you could help that process by giving me names, it'd be helpful. So in 2 weeks, we're going to meet in this room to talk just about the growth rate, and then after this meeting, I'd like to meet with those that would like to work with me, at least for the first meeting, as a data working group, and we can maybe meet next week on that. Does that sound okay? No? 6 weeks? Yeah, May 6th is 3 weeks. That's good. So we have 2 data meetings before May 6th. Anyway, thank you so much for coming out. And thank you to Alice and Miru for helping me with that too.
One way I'm worried about traffic is in Florida. Now, I go tomorrow night, and I'm trying to push through this 271 house development down the way to Fresno. So, yes, that's going to be on the